Ray Donovan wiped his forehead with the back of his hand, leaving another smudge of grease to join the collection already there. His shoulders ached from hunching over engines for 14 hours straight, but the smile on his face made the exhaustion worth it. He'd finally done it, fixed the impossible-to-repair vintage Porsche that had been sitting in his shop for weeks. "She purrs like a kitten now," Ray said to himself, patting the gleaming hood of the classic car. The rich burgundy paint reflected the overhead lights of his small but immaculate garage. This wasn't just any car. It belonged to one of the wealthiest men in town, someone who could have shipped it anywhere in the world for repairs but had trusted Ray instead. Ray checked his watch and sighed. It was already 7 in the evening on Friday, and he'd promised himself a nice dinner to celebrate once he finished this job. Not just any dinner. He'd been saving up for months to try the Golden Spoon, the fanciest restaurant downtown that everyone talked about. He'd even called 3 weeks ago to make a reservation, something he'd never done before. "No time to go home and change now," he muttered, looking down at his stained work clothes. The blue coveralls had seen better days, with patches and oil, stains telling the story of years of honest work. Ray headed to the small bathroom in the corner of his shop and scrubbed his hands with the special soap that cut through grease. Despite his best efforts, dark lines remained under his fingernails and his hands still looked rough and worn. Ray locked up his shop, taking one last proud look at the Porsche before heading to his old pickup truck. The contrast couldn't have been more striking. The luxury car worth hundreds of thousands sitting next to his 20-year-old truck with the dented fender and faded paint. But that truck had never let him down, just like Ray never let his customers down. The drive downtown took him past gleaming skyscrapers and luxury boutiques that seemed like they belonged to another world. Ray had grown up on the other side of town, where people fixed things instead of throwing them away and where a good day's work was measured in calluses and honest sweat. The Golden Spoon stood like a glittering jewel on the corner of Park Avenue, with a red carpet leading to its entrance and a doorman in a fancy uniform checking names off a list. Ray parked his truck a block away, suddenly feeling self-conscious about how out of place it would look among the shiny luxury cars lined up for valet parking. As he walked toward the restaurant, Ray caught his reflection in a store window. His face was clean but tired, with laugh lines around his eyes that had deepened over his 45 years. His dark hair was slightly messy, and despite washing, there was still a smudge of grease near his temple. He straightened his shoulders. He might not look like their usual customers, but his money was as good as anyone else's. "Good evening," Ray said politely to the doorman who looked him up and down with barely disguised surprise. "I have a reservation for 7:30. Name's Donovan." The doorman checked his list, his eyebrows rising slightly when he found the name. With clear reluctance, he stepped aside. "The maitre d' will assist you," he said coolly. The inside of the Golden Spoon was even more impressive than Ray had imagined. Crystal chandeliers hung from high ceilings, casting a warm glow over tables draped in crisp white tablecloths. The soft notes of a piano floated through the air, mixing with the gentle clink of expensive silverware and the murmur of conversation from people who probably spent more on a single meal than Ray did on groceries for a week. Every table was occupied by people in expensive suits or dresses, with perfect hair and jewelry that caught the light. Ray stood a little straighter, reminding himself that he had every right to be there. The maitre d', a tall, thin man with slicked-back hair and a look of permanent disapproval, approached Ray with obvious distaste. "Can I help you?" he asked, his tone suggesting he doubted very much that he could. "Yes, I have a reservation. Ray Donovan, for one person, at 7:30. The maitre d' made a show of checking his book, though Ray could see his name clearly written on the page. "I'm afraid there must be some mistake," the man said, closing the book with a snap. "There's no mistake," Ray said calmly, pointing to his name on the list. "I called 3 weeks ago." The maitre d' sniffed. "I'm afraid we have certain standards at the Golden Spoon. Perhaps you might be more comfortable at the diner down the street." His voice had risen and nearby diners were turning to stare. Heat crept up Ray's neck, but he kept his voice steady. "I made a reservation and I'd like to be seated, please." "Is there a problem here, Thomas?" a new voice asked. A well-dressed, Man with an expensive watch and a face flushed from too much wine appeared at the maitre d's side. "This gentleman seems to think he has a reservation, Mr. Parker," Thomas the maitre d' said. The man named Parker looked Ray up and down, his lip curling slightly. "I don't think he understands what kind of establishment this is. We can't have people like him in here. The clientele would be uncomfortable." People at nearby tables were openly staring now. A woman in diamonds whispered behind her hand to her companion, and several people snickered. "I understand exactly what kind of place this is," Ray said quietly, his dignity intact despite the public humiliation. "And I made a reservation just like everyone else." "People like you don't belong in places like this," Parker said, his voice rising. "You'll get grease on the tablecloths. You'll drive away my customers. Security." A burly man in a dark suit appeared almost instantly. "Please escort this mechanic out of my restaurant," Parker said, saying the word mechanic like it was something dirty. "I fix things that break," Ray said, looking Parker directly in the eye as the security guard took his arm. "Including things that people like you think are beyond repair. That's nothing to be ashamed of." Several diners looked away, suddenly finding their plates fascinating. One older gentleman frowned, looking uncomfortable with the scene unfolding before him. The security guard wasn't rough, but he was firm as he guided Ray toward the exit. As they reached the door, Ray stopped and turned to face the room of wealthy diners. "I just wanted a good meal to celebrate finishing a job," he said, not loudly, but clearly enough for everyone to hear. "I didn't know the price of a meal here included being treated like a human being." With that, Ray walked out on his own, his back straight and his head held high. Outside in the cool evening air, he took a deep breath and pulled out his phone. He wasn't a man who made a fuss or held grudges, but something about this felt different. Like, it wasn't just about him but about something bigger. He scrolled through his contacts until he found the number he was looking for. It rang twice before a friendly voice answered. "Mr. Pierce, it's Ray Donovan. Your Porsche's ready, sir. Perfect condition, just like I promised." He paused, listening to the delighted response on the other end. "Actually, sir, there is something I'd like to tell you about if you have a minute." Ray stood on the sidewalk outside the Golden Spoon, the cool night air a stark contrast to the hot embarrassment still burning on his face. Couples and groups in fancy clothes walked past him, some glancing curiously at the mechanic who looked so out of place in this upscale part of town. But Ray barely noticed them. He was focused on his phone call. "Yes, Mr. Pierce. Your Porsche is running perfectly now," Ray said, his voice steady despite what had just happened. That unusual knocking sound found out it was a tiny piece of metal caught in one of the valves. Previous mechanics probably couldn't hear it because it only happened when the engine hit a certain temperature. Ray listened as the billionaire on the other end expressed his delight. Jonathan Pierce had been trying to get that Porsche fixed for 3 years, taking it to specialty shops across the country without success. The car had belonged to his father, making it priceless to him beyond its considerable market value. "Actually, sir," Ray continued, scuffing his worn work boot against the pavement, "I'm downtown right now. I just had an interesting experience at the Golden Spoon restaurant." As Ray calmly explained what had happened, his voice never rising, never showing anger, just stating the facts as they occurred, the tone on the other end of the line changed dramatically. "No, sir, please don't trouble yourself," Ray said, surprised by the reaction. "I just thought you should know since I remember you mentioning you were involved with the place." What Ray hadn't said was how much he knew about Jonathan Pierce's business dealings. He didn't mention that after 15 years of fixing luxury cars, he had heard countless conversations between wealthy people who spoke freely around the help, not realizing that Ray's ears worked just as well as his hands. He didn't mention that he knew Jonathan Pierce owned 60% of the Golden Spoon, or that the restaurant had been struggling financially before Pierce stepped in 2 years ago. "I understand, sir. Thank you for your time, and enjoy the Porsche. She's ready whenever you want to pick her up." Ray ended the call and stood for a moment, wondering what to do with his ruined evening. His stomach growled, reminding him he hadn't eaten since a hasty sandwich at noon. As Ray walked back to his truck, his phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Mr. Pierce. "Stay right where you are. My driver's coming to get you. We need to talk." 10 minutes later, a sleek black car pulled up to the curb. The driver, a friendly-faced older man named Joe who had brought vehicles to Ray's shop many times, stepped out with a smile. "Evening, Ray. Boss says I'm to take you to his place right away." Joe looked at Ray's stained coveralls and grinned. "Don't worry about how you're dressed. Mr. Pierce said to tell you that real worth isn't found in fancy clothes." The drive to the Pierce estate took 30 minutes, leaving the glittering city behind for the winding roads of the wealthy hillside communities. Ray had been to the mansion before, but always through the service entrance, coming to pick up or deliver vehicles. This time, Joe drove right up to the front door. "Go on in," Joe said. "They're expecting you." Ray felt awkward walking up the grand steps in his work clothes, but the butler who opened the door greeted him with genuine warmth. "Mr. Donovan, welcome. Mr. Pierce is in the garage. He asked that you join him there." Of course he would be. In the garage, Ray thought with a smile. Jonathan Pierce might be a billionaire tech entrepreneur, but he was also a true car enthusiast who loved to be around engines, even if he didn't know how to fix them himself. The garage was actually a climate-controlled building larger than Ray's entire shop, housing a collection of over 20 rare and vintage vehicles. Jonathan Pierce stood next to the burgundy Porsche, running his hand lovingly over its hood. "Ray, there you are," Pierce called out, his face lighting up. Unlike many wealthy people Ray had met, Pierce had always treated him with respect, genuinely interested in Ray's expertise rather than seeing him as just someone who provided a service. "She looks incredible, even better than when my father had her." Ray smiled, some of the tension from the evening finally leaving his shoulders. "She's a beautiful machine, sir. Just needed someone patient enough to listen to what she was trying to tell us." Pierce nodded, understanding perfectly. He was in his 50s with salt and pepper hair and the fit look of someone who could afford the best trainers and nutritionists. "That's what makes you different from other mechanics, Ray. You don't just fix cars, you understand them." Ray shrugged, uncomfortable with praise. "Just doing my job, sir." "No," Pierce said firmly. "What you do is rare, and that's why what happened tonight makes me so angry." His face darkened. "Tell me again, from the beginning." As Ray recounted the events at the Golden Spoon, Pierce's expression grew increasingly troubled. When Ray mentioned how the owner had called him a grease monkey, Pierce's jaw tightened. "That would be Harold Parker," Pierce said. "He thinks owning 20% of the restaurant makes him the king of the world." He shook his head. "What Parker doesn't understand is that his 20% exists at my pleasure. I own the controlling share." Pierce pulled out his phone. "I need to make a call." As Pierce dialed, Ray suddenly felt uncomfortable. "Sir, I didn't tell you all this to get anyone in trouble. I just thought—" Pierce held up a hand. "Ray, do you know how many of my friends bring their cars exclusively to you? Do you know that the governor won't let anyone else touch his classic Jaguar? That half the luxury car owners in this city would be devastated if you ever closed shop?" Ray blinked in surprise. He knew he had a solid reputation, but he'd never thought about it that way. "The way Parker treated you isn't just wrong because it's rude," Pierce continued. "It's wrong because he failed to recognize true excellence when it was standing right in front of him. In my business, that's an unforgivable mistake." Pierce's call connected. "Harold, Jonathan Pierce here. I understand you had a visitor at the restaurant tonight, a mechanic named Ray Donovan." He paused, listening. "No, don't give me excuses. Ray is standing right here with me next to the priceless Porsche he just restored. The one that 5 of your so-called appropriate friends couldn't fix." Ray could hear the sputtering voice on the other end of the line. "Harold, let me be clear," Pierce said, his voice dropping to a dangerous calm. "Ray Donovan has more skill in his little finger than most people have in their entire body. Half your regular customers trust him with cars worth more than your restaurant. And you threw him out because of his clothes?" Another pause. "No, I don't think you do understand, but you will. Soon." Pierce ended the call and turned to Ray with a grim smile. "Let's get you some dinner, shall we?" My chef makes an excellent steak. And while we eat, I'd like to talk to you about some changes that are about to happen at the Golden Spoon. Ray followed Pierce toward the house, suddenly realizing that in the world of the wealthy and powerful, skills and connections often mattered more than appearances. A lesson Harold Parker was about to learn the hard way. Back at the Golden Spoon, Harold Parker was straightening his expensive tie and chatting with a group of regular customers when his phone rang. The moment he saw Jonathan Pierce's name on the screen, his face lit up. Having the billionaire call him directly always felt like a validation of his importance. "Jonathan, what a pleasure," he said loudly enough for nearby diners to hear, wanting everyone to know he was on a first-name basis with one of the richest men in town. The smile froze on Parker's face as he listened to Pierce's words. His eyes darted around the dining room, as if suddenly seeing it differently, seeing the restaurant not as his kingdom but as a business largely owned by someone else. "A mechanic?" "Yes, there was someone like that," Parker said, lowering his voice and turning away from his guests. "But Jonathan, you have to understand, he was in filthy work clothes. This is a 5-star establishment. We have standards to—" Parker's face drained of color as Pierce cut him off. The hand holding his phone began to tremble visibly. Several nearby diners noticed, exchanging curious glances. "He's there with you now?" Parker asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "With the Porsche?" A bead of sweat formed on his forehead as the implication sank in. "Jonathan, I had no idea he was if I'd known he worked for you." Parker listened for another moment, his expression growing more alarmed with each passing second. "Yes, of course I understand," he said, though his face showed he was only beginning to grasp the severity of his mistake. I'll make this right, Jonathan. I promise you." When Parker ended the call, he stood motionless in the middle of the busy restaurant, looking like a man who'd just seen his future crumble before his eyes. The maitre d' Thomas approached cautiously. "Is everything all right, sir?" Thomas asked. Parker grabbed him by the arm and pulled him into a quiet corner. "That mechanic we threw out, do you know who he is?" he hissed. Thomas looked confused. "Just some grease monkey who wandered in, sir." "No, you fool." Parker's voice rose, then dropped again as he glanced around nervously. "He's Jonathan Pierce's personal mechanic, the only man who could fix Pierce's priceless Porsche. And apparently he maintains cars for half our clientele." Thomas's eyes widened in alarm. "Mr. Pierce called you about this?" "Pierce is furious. The mechanic, Donovan, is at Pierce's mansion right now." Parker ran a shaking hand through his hair. "Do you have any idea what Pierce could do to us if he pulls his investment? We'd be finished in a week." "What are we going to do?" Thomas asked, his usual cool demeanor completely gone. "I don't know yet," Parker muttered. "But we need to fix this, and fast." Across town at the Pierce estate, Ray was enjoying the most amazing meal of his life. Jonathan Pierce had insisted his chef prepare a special dinner, and now Ray sat at a table on the terrace overlooking the city lights, savoring a steak that melted in his mouth. "This is incredible," Ray said, feeling a bit awkward in his work clothes amid such luxury. But Pierce had insisted he was perfect just as he was. "Carl trained in Paris," Pierce said, referring to his chef. "But honestly, I think he makes the best steak in America." Ray nodded in agreement, then hesitated. "Mr. Pierce, I appreciate all this, but I don't want to cause trouble for anyone. I just wanted to let you know what happened because I figured you should be aware, as an investor." Pierce set down his wine glass and regarded Ray thoughtfully. "Let me ask you something, Ray. In the 15 years you've been fixing cars for the wealthiest people in this city, how many times have you been treated the way Parker treated you tonight?" Ray thought about it. "More than I can count," he admitted. "And how many times have you done something about it?" "Never," Ray said quietly. "It's not worth the trouble. I just do my job and go home." Pierce nodded. "That's what people like Parker count on. They believe they can treat people badly and there won't be consequences because the people they step on don't have power." He leaned forward. "But you do have power, Ray. You just don't use it." "I'm just a mechanic," Ray said with a shrug. "No," Pierce said firmly. "You're the best mechanic in the state, possibly in the country. The waiting list for your services is months long. Governors and CEOs wait patiently for you to fix their cars because they know no one else can do what you do." He smiled. "That's power, Ray. Real power, based on skill and integrity, not on money or fancy clothes." Ray had never thought about it that way. He just loved fixing things, solving mechanical puzzles that stumped others. The fact that many of his clients were wealthy was almost accidental. "My call to Parker wasn't just about defending you," Pierce continued. "It was about something bigger. There's a disease in our society where people judge others by appearance, by the job they do, by how much money they have. I've watched you work, Ray. I've seen the care and intelligence you bring to everything you touch. You have more talent and integrity than most of the people who dine at the Golden Spoon, myself included." Ray felt his face flush with the unexpected praise. "So what happens now?" he asked. "Now," Pierce said, picking up his phone, "we make some calls." Over the next hour, Ray watched in amazement as Pierce contacted one wealthy car owner after another, briefly explaining what had happened at the Golden Spoon. The reactions were immediate and supportive. "That was the governor," Pierce said after one call. "He's canceling the fundraising dinner he had booked at the Golden Spoon next month. Says he can't support a business that disrespects the man who keeps his classic car collection running." Another call ended with Pierce smiling broadly. "The Wilsons are canceling their anniversary party there. Mrs. Wilson says she remembers when you stayed up all night to fix their daughter's car before her wedding day." Ray remembered that job well. The bride's vintage car had developed problems the night before the wedding, and Ray had worked through the night to make sure she could use it as planned. He hadn't thought much of it. It was just what needed to be done. Pierce's phone buzzed with an incoming call. He checked the screen and raised an eyebrow. "It's Parker," he said. "Third time he's tried to call in the last 20 minutes. Think he's beginning to understand the situation." Pierce declined the call and set his phone down. Let him sweat a little longer. Ray felt a mix of emotions. On one hand, he took no pleasure in seeing someone else in trouble. On the other hand, there was something satisfying about people like Parker finally facing consequences for how they treated others. "What exactly do you want from him?" Ray asked. "An apology?" Pierce smiled, but it wasn't entirely kind. "Oh, I want much more than that. I want change." He refilled Ray's water glass. "But first, let's enjoy this excellent meal. Parker can wait a little longer to learn his lesson." As they continued their dinner, Ray's phone began lighting up with text messages and calls from numbers he didn't recognize. Word was spreading through the city's elite social circles, and suddenly, everyone remembered how much they valued their unassuming mechanic with the magic touch. The reckoning for the Obira Golden Spoon was just beginning. Harold Parker barely slept that night. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Jonathan Pierce's name on his phone screen, heard the cold fury in the billionaire's voice, and felt the ground shifting beneath his feet. By morning, his worst fears began to materialize. The restaurant's phone started ringing at 8 a.m. sharp. The first call was from the Wilson family, canceling their anniversary celebration, a 30-person event that would have brought in thousands of dollars. Before the hostess could even process that cancellation, 3 more calls came in, all regulars, all canceling their upcoming reservations. "What reason did they give?" Parker demanded, his tie askew and dark circles under his eyes as he rushed into the restaurant earlier than usual. The hostess looked uncomfortable. "They all mentioned something about how the restaurant treated a mechanic last night. Mr. Wilson specifically said he wouldn't dine at a place that disrespects Ray Donovan." Parker's stomach dropped. He'd hoped it was a bad dream, that somehow this would all blow over. Now he realized Pierce had been busy making calls. His phone buzzed with a notification. With trembling fingers, he opened the local news app to find a headline that made his blood run cold. "Exclusive restaurant faces backlash after ejecting local mechanic." The article wasn't on the front page, but it was there in the business section, quoting sources close to the situation about how the Golden Spoon had humiliated a respected local businessman because of his work clothes. By mid-morning, the restaurant's social media accounts were flooded with comments. Won't be dining somewhere that judges people by their clothes instead of their character. Ray Donovan fixed my vintage Mercedes when no one else could. He deserves respect wherever he goes. Typical elitist behavior. Boycotting the Golden Spoon until they make this right. Parker tried calling Pierce again, the 5th time since last night, but still got no answer. His business partner, a quiet investor, named Reynolds, who usually stayed out of day-to-day operations, called next. "Harold, what the hell is going on? I'm getting calls from friends asking if it's true that we throw out working people from our restaurant." "It's a misunderstanding," Parker said, wiping sweat from his forehead. "This mechanic came in looking like he'd just crawled out from under a car." "That mechanic," Reynolds cut in, "apparently maintains the governor's car collection, and he's personally valued by Jonathan Pierce. Did you know that before you threw him out?" "How was I supposed to know?" Parker protested weakly. "Maybe by treating everyone with respect, regardless of what they're wearing," Reynolds suggested, his voice sharp. "I've got the investors' quarterly meeting in an hour. Pierce called it urgently this morning. I have a feeling it's about this situation, and it's not going to be pleasant." The call ended, leaving Parker staring at his phone. In despair, it was all falling apart so quickly. He'd spent years building his reputation, positioning the Golden Spoon as the most exclusive restaurant in town, a place where the elite could dine without mixing with ordinary people. Now that carefully crafted image was becoming a liability, overnight. Across town, Ray woke up in his modest apartment above his repair shop. He'd declined Pierce's offer to stay in one of the mansion's guest rooms, preferring the familiar comfort of his own space. As he made his morning coffee, his phone buzzed constantly with notifications. Ray frowned as he scrolled through dozens of messages from clients and even strangers, all expressing support and outrage about what had happened at the Golden Spoon. Someone had shared the story online, and it was spreading fast. "This isn't what I wanted," Ray muttered to himself, setting the phone down. He hadn't told Pierce about the incident to start a public battle or to harm anyone's business. He just thought his client should know about the kind of place he was investing in. The bell over his shop door jingled, and Ray walked downstairs to find Joe, Pierce's driver, waiting with a newspaper tucked under his arm. "Morning, Ray," Joe said with a grin. "Mr. Pierce asked me to bring you breakfast and show you this." He held up the newspaper where Ray could see a small headline about the Golden Spoon controversy. Ray shook his head. "This is getting out of hand. Mr. Pierce also wanted me to let you know there's an emergency investors meeting for the restaurant this morning," Joe added. "He says to tell you that changes are coming." "I don't want anyone to lose their jobs over this," Ray said, concern evident in his voice. Joe smiled. "Mr. Pierce mentioned you'd say that. He said to tell you this isn't about revenge. It's about fixing something that's broken, just like you'd do with an engine." Throughout the morning, Ray tried to focus on his work, a Ferrari with electrical problems that had stumped 2 other shops. But he kept getting interrupted by calls and visitors. The mailman stopped to shake his hand. A local reporter left, a business card. 3 different customers happened to be in the neighborhood and stopped by to share their support. By lunchtime, the story had grown even larger. A local TV station sent a reporter to interview people on the street about whether restaurants should be allowed to enforce dress codes. The city's most popular food blogger posted a long piece questioning whether the Golden Spoon's exclusivity was out of touch with modern values. Meanwhile, at the emergency investors meeting for the Golden Spoon, Harold Parker sat at one end of a long table, sweating profusely, as Jonathan Pierce calmly laid out the damage to the restaurant's reputation. 17 major reservations. Canceled in the last 12 hours, Pierce said. Our social media mentions are 97% negative, and I've received calls from 8 fellow investors who are concerned about being associated with a business that's being described as elitist and discriminatory. It was one incident, Parker protested weakly. One person who wasn't dressed appropriately. That one person, Pierce cut in, fixes cars for half the people in this room. He's kept vintage vehicles running that experts said were beyond repair. He's trusted with cars worth millions because he's the best at what he does. And you judged him solely on his appearance. The other investors around the table nodded in agreement. Parker looked from face to face, hoping to find a sympathetic expression, but found none. The restaurant industry is difficult enough without self-inflicted wounds like this, said Reynolds, Parker's business partner. We need to take immediate action to repair the damage. I've drafted a public apology, Parker said quickly, pulling out a sheet of paper. We'll post it on our website and social media accounts today. Pierce shook his head. That's not enough, Harold. This incident has revealed a deeper problem. A culture that you've created where worth is measured by appearance and status rather than character and substance. He looked around the table. I believe we need new management. Parker felt the room spin around him. You're firing me from my own restaurant? The restaurant that we all invested in, Pierce corrected gently. The restaurant that now faces a crisis because of your actions. The vote was quick and unanimous. By early afternoon, Harold Parker was no longer the managing owner of the Golden Spoon. As he emptied his office, he couldn't help but marvel at how quickly his world had changed, all because he judged a man by his coveralls rather than his character. 1 week after the incident, Ray was underneath a classic Cadillac, his focus entirely on a tricky transmission problem. The familiar sounds of his shop surrounded him, the soft hum of the fluorescent lights, the clank of tools, and the old radio playing quietly in the corner. This was his world, and he was content in it. The bell over the door jingled, but Ray kept working. His assistant would handle any customers. Mr. Donovan? A voice called out, uncertain and nervous. Ray recognized that voice. Sliding out from under the car, he sat up to find Harold Parker standing awkwardly by the entrance, looking very different from the confident restaurant owner who had thrown him out a week ago. Parker's expensive suit was wrinkled, his shoulders slumped, and the arrogant look in his eyes had been replaced by something Ray hadn't expected to see. Humility. Mr. Parker, Ray said evenly, wiping his hands on a rag as he stood. What brings you to my shop? Parker glanced around the garage, at the immaculate organization of tools, the gleaming vintage cars in various stages of repair, the framed thank you letters from satisfied customers that lined the walls. I came to apologize, Parker said, his voice barely above a whisper. What I did to you at the restaurant was wrong. I judged you by your clothes, not your character. I treated you with disrespect you didn't deserve. Ray studied the man, carefully. That's quite a change from last week. Parker nodded, his face flushing with embarrassment. I've had time to think. After the investors removed me as managing owner, I was angry at first. I blamed you, blamed Pierce, blamed everyone, except myself. He sighed heavily. Then my wife asked me a simple question. Would you have thrown that man out if he'd been wearing an expensive suit? And I couldn't answer her. Ray leaned against a workbench, listening. The truth is, Parker continued, I've spent my whole life believing that worth comes from appearance, from the clothes you wear, the car you drive, the neighborhood you live in. I created a restaurant that celebrated that belief, that catered to people's desire to feel superior because of what they owned. And now, Ray asked, now I see how empty that is. Parker looked directly at Ray. I've spent the past week learning about you. I've talked to people who know you who bring their cars to you. The governor told me how you drove 4 hours in a snowstorm to fix his wife's car when it broke down. The Thompsons told me how you charged them less than you quoted because you found a simpler solution to their problem. Everyone spoke about your honesty, your skill, your decency. Ray shifted uncomfortably. He'd never sought recognition for those things. They were just the right way to live and work. Pierce offered me one chance, Parker said. One opportunity to prove I could change. He's allowing me to stay involved with the Golden Spoon, but only if I work with the new management to transform the restaurant's culture. He hesitated, then asked, would you be willing to help me do that? Ray's eyebrows shot up in surprise. Me? What could I possibly do to help with a fancy restaurant? You could show me what real values look like, Parker said simply, and you could be our guest of honor at our reopening next month. Ray shook his head. I'm not interested in being part of some publicity stunt. It's not that, Parker insisted. Pierce suggested something else, something meaningful. He wants to start a monthly dinner at the Golden Spoon for young people, interested in trades and technical careers. Mechanics, plumbers, electricians, construction workers. A chance for them to experience fine dining, yes, but more importantly, a chance for our regular customers to meet and appreciate people with real skills who keep our world running. Ray thought about that for a moment. And what would my role be? Our guest of honor at the first dinner, Parker said. And afterwards, if you're willing, an advisor to help us identify promising young people who might benefit from this program. He smiled wryly. Pierce pointed out that you probably know more about recognizing real talent than all our investors combined. Ray scratched his chin thoughtfully. I do know some promising kids at the technical high school where I sometimes teach weekend workshops. 2 weeks later, the Golden Spoon reopened its doors with a new look and a new philosophy. The white tablecloths and crystal chandeliers remained, but the stuffy atmosphere was gone. The new dress code posted discreetly by the entrance simply read, "We value character over clothing. All respectful guests are welcome." On this special evening, Ray pulled his old pickup truck into the parking lot, now parked alongside luxury vehicles without looking out of place. He'd compromised slightly on his attire, clean jeans and a button-up shirt instead of his work coveralls, but Pierce had insisted that Ray should be comfortable being himself. As Ray entered the restaurant, he was greeted warmly by the new maitre d', a friendly woman who treated every guest with the same respect. The dining room was filled with an unusual mix of people. Wealthy regulars in fine clothes sat alongside young mechanics, electricians, and carpentry students in more casual attire. Ray spotted Jonathan Pierce chatting with a young woman who was enthusiastically describing how she had rebuilt an engine. Nearby, Harold Parker was listening intently to a plumbing apprentice explain the complexities of modern water systems. Ray, there you are, Pierce called, waving him over. I want you to meet some of these impressive young people. For the next 2 hours, Ray found himself the center of attention, as students sought his advice and regular customers asked about his work. More than once, he overheard wealthy diners exchanging phone numbers with young tradespeople offering mentorship or job opportunities. Later in the evening, Pierce clinked his glass for attention and stood at the center of the room. Tonight marks a new beginning for the Golden Spoon, he announced. I've learned an important lesson about true value. In our society, we often celebrate wealth, status, and appearance, while overlooking the skill, integrity, and hard work that actually keep our world functioning. He gestured toward Ray. A week ago, this man was judged unworthy of dining here because of his work clothes. Tonight, we recognize that we are privileged to have him among us. Ray Donovan reminds us that true excellence isn't about what you wear or how much money you have. It's about doing your work with skill and integrity, about treating others with respect regardless of their status. Looking around the room, Ray saw nodding heads and thoughtful expressions. He noticed Harold Parker standing near the kitchen, a changed man from the arrogant owner who had thrown him out. Parker caught his eye and gave a small, respectful nod. As the evening wound down, a young mechanic approached Ray, nervousness clear on his face. Mr. Donovan, I've been wanting to meet you for years. I'm in my final year at the technical school, and I was wondering. He hesitated, then gathered his courage. Would you consider taking on an apprentice? Ray smiled, thinking about how a single incident had created a ripple effect that was still spreading outward in ways he couldn't have imagined. Come by the shop on Monday, he said. We'll talk. As Ray drove home that night, he reflected on how quickly things had changed. The restaurant had been transformed. Harold Parker was learning humility and genuine respect. Young people with technical talents were being recognized for their value, and all because someone had finally faced consequences for judging a book by its cover. His phone buzzed with a text from Pierce. Thank you for giving Parker a second chance. Not everyone would have been so generous. This is just the beginning of the changes you've inspired. Ray smiled to himself. He'd spent his life fixing broken things, cars mostly. But now, perhaps, he'd helped fix something even more important. a broken way of seeing the world.